Hello, good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
We have an exciting topic today, which is breastfeeding, always one of our most popular ones. And we've got one of the most experienced IBCLCs, and we'll get into what that means in a little bit. But Alona is basically one of our favorite breastfeeding experts here in Singapore. Sent lots of clients her way. And today we're going to talk a little bit about, managing expectations. How does breastfeeding even work? And how can I get off to a good start once I have my baby? So super important for you pregnant mamas. But Alona is also here to answer any breastfeeding related questions. So if you have questions on how do I wean my baby off the breast, or how can I make it so that I can sleep through the night, or whatever,
That's a lovely question.
or how can I, pump effectively when I'm going back to work, all of these questions will be answered. So Alona, let's start by putting you on speaker view. And can you give us a little introduction of yourself, please?
So yes, hi, my name is Alona Hodik. I'm an IBCLC, and IBCLC is short for International Board Certified Lactation Consultant. It's a huge mouthful, but it's basically the gold standard in lactation care. So there are a lot of different people out there saying they're LCs. You really want to know what that term means and what their credentials are, because you can claim to be an LC, but if you don't have the knowledge and the training, some damage can be done.
Yeah.
So we really need to be quite careful about that. I've been living in Singapore for 10 years now, and working here for most of that time. I have 3 kids who I love very much and are the reason I do this. And really, really happy to be here on a Wednesday morning.
Amazing. I just want to go back to the IBCLC thing because, I think different situations require different things. And of course, we have mother-led groups like the La Leche League and so on, and they all have their place and, it's
Yes,
great.
definitely.
But, when you have a real I think it's really tricky. I want to say that as well, especially in the early days. You get so many different opinions by so many different people, and it's really difficult to see the wood for the trees. And I'd rather go to someone where I know, okay, this is because IBCLC is the only regulatory body in breastfeeding, right? So we know that these people are properly trained, they practice evidence-based care, and that is super, super important, because just because something worked for your cousin doesn't mean that it's the right thing for you. Anyway, I'm waffling on, but I think it's really important for people to understand that.
And I completely agree. And listen, I started off as a breastfeeding counselor, and it's a lovely thing. So if your breastfeeding journey is going really well and everything is fine, and suddenly you hit a little roadblock, or you have a question about breast milk storage, or anything that's quite general and everything else is working, please
Perfect.
ask a question on a Facebook group or your mommy's group. And that's really why they're there for. But if something is not working, if it's painful, if baby is not gaining weight, if we have a more complicated situation, then
Yeah.
you really want to see a specialist and see what's causing that.
And I need to add something else, because I hope that a lot of pregnant mamas will be watching this and listening to this. And I think what I experience as a doula is that in the early days, things can go downhill very fast. And if you don't have the right advice, the problem is your pediatrician and your nurse at the hospital, they all have different priorities, because let's face it, in the newborn period, there's so many things going on. The struggle of the hormonal roller coaster, the postpartum healing. Maybe a mom had a difficult birth where she lost a lot of blood. So everybody will have different priorities. But if breastfeeding is your priority, the person you should be listening to is Alona or other lovely IBCLCs. So anyway, without further ado, I think we'll go into your presentation that you've prepared.
Perfect.
And while she is doing that, setting up the presentation, I wanted to say hello to all the mummies on the call. Maybe there's even daddies, grandparents, I don't know. But thank you for being here. And if you have any questions that are pertaining to a slide that Alona is presenting on, please put them in the chat. And or tell us that you want to speak to us, and then we'll read the question for Alona. Okay?
Perfect.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Most welcome.
So let's talk breastfeeding. As mentioned, my name is Alona Hodik. For anyone who just joined, I'm a lactation consultant and a childbirth educator because I'm a big nerd and I like to know as much as I can about as much as I can. And I'm the founder of Belly to Breastfeeding. I thought it was a cool name, but now I realize it's too long, but it's everywhere, so it's gonna stay there.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, it's really important to know who the person who is giving you the information. So this is a little bit of background about me. I have 3 kids, 2 girls and a little boy. All were breastfed, all had their own challenges. I've been living in Asia for 15 years now, so 5 years in Hong Kong and 10 years in Singapore. I'm an international board certified lactation consultant, childbirth educator. I have a bachelor's degree in biology, so I know the behind the scenes of what's going on. And I have an MBA I'm not really using, but my parents are really happy I have it. So I guess that's a win for everyone. So I am here to help you meet your goals. I don't judge. I work with families who are exclusively latching, pumping, mixed feeding, and formula feeding. And my job is to make your breastfeeding journey or your feeding journey as best as it can be and optimized for you. I believe your breastfeeding journey starts when you're pregnant. So hopefully there are quite a lot of pregnant moms here because it's the best time to absorb this information. And I offer lactation consultations either at your home or virtually. Well, I wrote Asia, but it's everywhere the time zone matches. So let's talk a little bit about the anatomy of breastfeeding. Breasts are this big question mark, right? Do I need to have big breasts for breastfeeding? Is it okay if I have small breasts? What is going on? So realistically, it doesn't matter if you have small breasts, big breasts. What is important is, did your breasts grow during pregnancy? Did you notice a change in size? Did they become more tender? Do you see more veins running through them? Did your nipples and areolas got bigger and darker? So all of these are signs that there's breast development and that the production of milk is underway. So if we simplify a little bit, your breast is composed of 2 things. So we have the fatty tissue, which usually tells us how big or small the breast is. And those grape-like structures, and they are called glandular tissues. They're the milk-making machines. That's where the milk is made. So it really doesn't matter if your breasts are big, small, if your nipples point up, down, sideways. That does not matter. But if they grow, if they develop, if they change, it means that we have the preparation needed for breastfeeding. Okay? How does it work though? Will a breastfeeding mom just lean forward and the milk start coming out? That will be really awkward, especially outside, won't it? So it actually doesn't really work like that. There are 2 main hormones involved in breastfeeding. Obviously, there are a lot of other ones, but these are the 2 main ones. So prolactin, which is the milk-making hormone, is in charge of, well, making milk. And oxytocin, which is probably a hormone most of us are more familiar with, is in charge of releasing the milk that's already been made to your baby. So the sequence looks a little bit like this. Your baby latches onto the breast and starts sucking at the breast. And then that sends signals to the brain to release these 2 hormones. So oxytocin goes back to the breast, squeezes those grape-like structures to release the milk through the ducts to the nipple and the baby. And at the same time, we have prolactin making more milk. So this is the idea behind supply and demand. So a lot of people will tell you supply and demand, you feed more, you make more. But why? because every time you feed, not only is your baby getting that milk that's already in the breast, but it also triggers more milk production. So that is how that whole thing works. Now, this is called the milk ejection reflex, or a lot of people refer to this as a letdown. Now, I'm not overly excited about that term because it's not the happiest term, I think.
Not at all.
Right? The letdown. Why someone thought it's a good idea is beyond me. But it is known as that. So I'm sharing the term, but I don't love it so much. But the idea is that is how milk is released to your baby. Most women have anywhere between 1 and 9 letdowns per feed. So it's not just one time. And it's not linear, it's not consistent. So you usually have one big letdown or fast letdown, and then we slow it down and baby needs to suckle a little bit faster. And then we have a few more letdowns until baby had all the milk they need. Okay? Now, especially in the early days, this whole process can be very, very inhibited by stress. So if you're stressed, your body will literally shut down. And the oxytocin won't be released and the milk won't flow as well. So especially in the early days, when it's time to feed, try and make yourself comfortable. Avoid stressful situations. If you're in the middle of a family gathering and your mother-in-law is right there, maybe it's a good idea to go to a different room so you're nice and calm, because we want to trigger the right hormones instead of having this very stressful experience. Okay, so as I mentioned, milk supply equals milk removal. The more milk is removed, more milk is being made. Okay? So, breast milk. And this in particular is colostrum. Colostrum is this amazing, amazing, amazing thing. It is actually made around 16 to 18 weeks of pregnancy, which is really, really cool. But because your body is tremendous in conserving energy, when you're pregnant, there's no baby on the outside to feed. So we're not going to waste energy and make milk. So the pregnancy hormones block the milk-making hormones. And what happens when the baby is born? The placenta is born, and then we start reducing those pregnancy hormones, and then the milk-making hormones go up. So that's kind of the idea. So we start with colostrum and we start with very little. We're going to talk about volumes and how many feeds in a bit, but we start with very little. So in this picture, it's a teaspoon. And even that is, we probably need a little bit of work to get there. In the beginning, we need very, very little, but it's so rich in nutrients and it's so rich in immune components. So this is the big deal here is it's almost like this is your baby's first immunization because it's so packed with immune components. Okay, now it can look like this. It can be yellow and sticky. It can be even orange, or it can be quite clear. It varies in composition, and I've really seen a lot of different variations. It doesn't look like milk, so it confuses a lot of people that think, oh, it's not really milk. My milk will come in. Another term that's really funny to me, come in from where? It feels like the soldiers are marching in to bring the milk. It's not that. It's just, we start with colostrum. We have colostrum for about 1 to 3 days, and then the milk starts changing. Once we move past this colostrum phase, we will have this transitional milk. So it resembles milk more, but it has this yellowy orangey tinge. And a few days after that, that orangey tinge goes away and it looks more like the milk we're expecting it to be. So milk changes a lot. It changes throughout your baby's life to adapt to your baby's needs. It changes from day to night. We know that nighttime milk is a little bit different than daytime milk, but it also changes throughout the feed, which is really, really cool. So when we start the feed, and a lot of people might have heard about foremilk and hindmilk, so I want to talk a little bit about that as well. When we start a feed, your milk is quite watery and almost clear, like sometimes even a bluish tinge to it. And as the feed progresses, we're gonna have less volume and more fat. So it's not that foremilk and hindmilk, there's a particular time where it just changes from foremilk to hindmilk. It's a process. So the longer the feed, the more fat in the milk. And towards the end of the feed, when we have very little volume and you feel like, oh, there isn't very much milk. Yes, that's true. But it's a richer kind of milk. So we want baby to benefit from that as well.
And I want to add here, if you don't mind, that, people might be asking themselves, why is that important? But I do see it often in the early days when the baby is very sleepy, where a mom feeds from the one side, the baby barely gets any, drops, and then switches. And then the next time the baby feeds, they switch to the other side rather than feeding them again from that same breast to get the benefit of the fattier milk. And so these are often the babies that then don't stay on track with their weight gain and so on, which is tricky in the first 2 weeks because the baby needs to regain or is expected to regain their birth weight in the first 2 weeks, right? So,
yeah. So we're going to talk about this in a bit because I like longer feeds to make sure baby is getting all the milk they need in terms of volume, but also in terms of that fatty hind milk. Yeah. And if that's why we don't want to limit baby's time on the breast. So when I hear, oh, don't feed more than 15 minutes or more than 20 minutes, I get rashes. Yes. I really, really do. I really do. Because it makes no sense. We're going to talk about that in a little bit.
Perfect.
It really makes no sense because if you're encouraging these short feeds, baby will just get that foremilk and will be gassy and uncomfortable and probably won't gain weight as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So another important thing is that milk composition hardly changes with diet changes. So a lot of questions that I get are about what can I eat? What can I not eat? And I like to remind people that babies are born throughout the world, different cultures, different foods, different diet suggestions. Yes, try and have a healthy, balanced diet. That is important for you and your baby. But don't stress yourself out too much about what you can and cannot eat. Because I had a mom a week ago who was told she can only have chicken and chicken soup. So for 3 weeks, she's had only chicken and chicken soup. And she said, I don't want to breastfeed anymore because I can't eat this.
Yeah.
Right? And the idea is you live your life. Yes, be conscious of what you eat, but you really don't just need to eat chicken soup all the time. So be kind to yourself and allow yourself a little bit of flexibility. That is completely fine. Do we have a question or can we move on?
We do. We have the question that you mentioned that there are a few different types of milk: foremilk, hindmilk, colostrum. Is there anything else, any other types that you want to mention?
So there's colostrum initially. Then we have transitional milk, so this in between colostrum and mature milk. And then we have this mature milk, which basically is at any time after about 2 weeks and until you wean. It does, however, change. It doesn't have different names, but it changes as your babies grow to adapt to their needs. For example, if baby is sick, then your milk will have more antibodies. If your baby is going through a growth spurt, it will be more. So it really changes to meet your baby's changing needs. And that's one of the really, really cool things about breast milk.
Sorry, there's another question.
Yep.
Is it okay to have a vegetarian or vegan diet for breastfeeding? Would
Yes.
that take the breast milk?
So yes, it is perfectly fine. Eat what you like to eat, but obviously with a vegetarian or a vegan diet, make sure your B12s are in order. If you need to have supplementation, so make sure you have all the levels you need. But vegetarians and vegans have made babies for centuries, and we're okay, right? So make sure your levels are okay. Make sure you have all the nutrients you need. But you do not suddenly need to become a carnivore because you are breastfeeding.
Okay, another question. So where does foremilk and hind milk fit into those categories of milk? Is it for colostrum transitional or mature?
So it's transitional and mature. Colostrum is a little bit unique in that sense. But when we're talking about anything from transitional, think of it as a process, okay? When we start the feed, it's a little bit more watery, and as the feed progresses, it gradually becomes richer and richer in fat. So it's not, there are no different time zones where it's foremilk versus hind milk. It just changes in composition throughout the feed. It's the same milk, just the composition changes.
And the composition also changes depending on, if you're out and about a lot and it's super, super hot, then you will produce more hydrating milk. Whereas if you're going skiing in Niseko or whatever in Japan, then it will become fattier so that it helps your baby regulate their temperature a little bit better.
So we know that women in cold countries make fattier milk versus women in warm countries will make more hydrating milk, right? So the needs are different and the milk is different because of it.
Great.
Okay. Yep, let's move on.
Yeah.
So let's talk volumes. And I know a lot of people are very, very interested in this. So when a baby is born, first of all, they have a bit of reserves, and they are not expecting to have huge feeds from the get-go. What's going on is day one, there was a very good study that found that in the first 24 hours, the total feeding amount was 37 ml.
Wow.
So not per feed, the whole 24 hours,
Yeah.
which means that it's literally a few mLs each time. And the reason why I actually like this is because you think about bottles when you think about feeding, but it's so ridiculous to think about a bottle in the first day because it's like this. It's a tiny amount. So we are talking about a syringe, or if we need to hand express, we're talking about a syringe or a teaspoon. We're talking about very, very small amounts because your baby's tummy is the size of a cherry pretty much. And even 5 to 7 ml in my experience is too much. So if I see a woman the day she gave birth and we can hand express 1 to 2 ml, that's so good. That is so good. And I think a lot of new moms are expecting to get these waterfalls the first day or two. And when they don't get them, they get really, really stressed and they go, oh, my milk hasn't kicked in or my milk hasn't come in. But your baby just needs very, very little in that first 1 or 2 days.
And this is really important to remember for all of you who are pregnant, because what I find, Alona, is that very often the nurses in the hospitals, they don't have the training that Alona has. So very often they will advise, for whatever reason, that the baby should be supplemented with formula. This could be jaundice. This could be, oh, look at your breasts, there's no milk coming out. When we know that it doesn't look like milk, it could look like sweat, that little bit of colostrum. It's very
Yes,
different.
and if it dries up, it looks like this white powder.
So they very often will talk a mom into supplementing. There could be urates in the nappy, like the little crystals that form, or maybe they're falling behind in output, but they're not encouraging you to latch more frequently
or even hand express.
Exactly. All they will give you is that little bottle that holds 40 ml of milk, and that's way more than the 5 to 7 milliliters they need in one feed. And what happens then is we overextend the stomach, and the mother has a hard time catching up because the breasts are not stimulated enough. And that's what I see time and time again. So even in these early days is a good time to reach out to an IBCLC because they can really change the trajectory of your breastfeeding.
So while you were talking, I have a I think this case was probably my biggest aha moment because it was very early on in my career. And I had a mom where we talked about prenatally, and she had her baby. Baby was quite small, 2.5 kilos at birth, and was born at 10 p.m. By midnight, the nurses said to give her 20 ml. 20 ml by midnight. She was 2 hours old. By 2 a.m., she was vomiting and in visible discomfort. And the mom was besides herself, obviously.
Yeah.
And this is what tends to happen. So the more information you have, the more you're prepared, the more you can also advocate for yourself and your baby.
Absolutely. And I want to stress here that we are not poo-pooing supplementation.
No, never.
There's absolutely a place for supplementing babies, even with formula, not just expressed milk. There could be health considerations, but most of the time we see it in perfectly happy babies with no medical indication. So always refer back to your pediatrician, who I hope is also breastfeeding aware and very supportive of that. And if you want, we can give you names of those that are. And enlist the help of a lactation consultant just to get a second opinion.
So here's the thing, and I thank you for bringing that up because I think it's important. I don't think supplementation is a dirty word.
No.
I really don't. My first job is to make sure baby is fed. And if baby is not fed or baby cannot latch for any reason, we think about ways to supplement. If we can supplement with breast milk, we will. And if we don't have enough, then we will talk about formula. I don't think formula is a bad word. I'm not against formula, but we need to know when to reach out, when to consider each of the options. And it's definitely not within the first 1 or 2 hours post-birth when we don't even know what's going on yet. So see what's happening. Try and hand express if your baby does need any supplementation. And if that isn't working, then let's talk to your pediatrician, talk to a lactation consultant, have a plan in place. Okay, so first 1 or 2 days, we have very, very small amounts. And then by day 3, we're already talking about 20 to 30 ml per feed, at least 8 times in 24 hours. So that's already a big jump. And that first week is actually quite intense in terms of increase. So day 3 is about 20 to 30. Day 4 is about 30 to 40. Day 5 is 40 to 50. And around 1 week, we're talking about those 45 to 60 ml per feed. So it's a big jump and a lot of work for your body in that first week. And also in that first month, because if you look at that egg at the end of the first month, a baby who is 4 to 6 weeks old will roughly take 80, 90 to 150 ml. 150 ml is usually on the higher end. Most of them won't be doing that. So the average will do about 90 to 120. But it's a huge jump from those few mLs that are happening on day 1 or 2. So my first question is, how do we get from a few mLs to an average of 90 to 120? So if anyone is brave enough to answer me, I would love to hear your thoughts. How do we get there? No one is brave enough. So let me look at my, so first of all, can I just for a second say, there is someone, but there is this red building there. I told you on this. That's why my face looks a little bit redder than usual. So please disregard. So we have answers?
Yes. Hand expressing, keep latching, supply and demand.
Perfect. So all the answers are correct. We feed and feed and feed and feed. And if we have a sleepy baby, or we have a jaundiced baby that needs phototherapy, or we had a C-section, then I would suggest latching and then hand expressing and adding a little bit of that hand expressed milk to your baby, either with a little teaspoon or with syringe finger feeding, to make sure we're overriding possible jaundice or sleepiness and getting more milk into your baby so we know they're on track. So we feed and feed and feed and feed and feed and feed and feed. And then we hit those 4 to 6 weeks, and babies feed for, at this point, and this is the interesting thing, they feed at least 8 times in 24 hours, but an average feed will be 45 to 60 minutes. And this is why we don't limit them to 15 minutes on each side or 10 minutes on each side, because usually it's not enough. So obviously we need to make sure nothing hurts. We need to make sure they're swallowing well, they're working well. But a normal newborn feed in the first 4 to 6 weeks is 45 to 60 minutes. Yes, I've seen babies going faster, but most of them do need this time.
Yeah. And I want to say too is often moms in the early days, we don't really know whether the baby is transferring milk. So yes, they're suckling, they're at the breast, and it seems like I've been doing this for half an hour. That quickly turn into 5 hours.
Very quickly.
But we don't know that they're actually getting the milk. And I know I'm not going to preempt what you're going to talk about in a minute, but I think it's important there also to have the experience of a lactation consultant to help you know what you need to listen for, to see that we hear a swallow, that there's actually milk going in.
So another thing I do, so when I do a home visit or a hospital visit, I have a very sensitive scale. So I always do a pre and post feed weight, and we actually know how much your baby is drinking. And you're right, I've had babies who spend half an hour, but they're not efficient because of different reasons, and they only transfer 20 ml. And even if they do an hour and a half, it still won't be enough. And then we need to see why is that, what's going on, how we can help.
Yeah.
But you don't need a fancy scale. You will need to know something else, and we will talk about this in a bit. But the last thing I want to talk about this slide is what happens after that first month. Why are there no more bottles or images or pictures? Why am I done at 1 month? And the answer is because you need to work really hard on building your supply in the first 4 to 6 weeks. But once you've established supply, once you're doing those 90 to 150 ml per feed, it stays there. It doesn't need to go up. So from 6 weeks and forever, this is how much most babies will drink. Because the milk composition changes as they grow, you don't need to make more. You don't need to go to 180, 210, 240. That is not how breast milk works. So there's a lot of work in the first 6 weeks, and then it really does become easier because you've built your supply, and hopefully baby is more practiced in latching. So feeds that are 45 to 60 minutes originally will become 30 to 40 minutes at about 6 weeks. And at about 2.5, 3 months, will become 10 to 20 minutes. And you're like, I didn't even sit down yet, and your baby is done with the feed. So you need to trust your body, trust your baby and the process, and allow both of you time to practice this. Because it's so funny. I've had so many families where we worked on these 1-hour feeds, and then I get a frantic message at 3 months going, why is my baby only feeding for 10 minutes? Surely they're not done. But they're growing well, they're doing well, they just become efficient and fast. So there is a silver lining. There is, you won't be feeding for an hour forever. You really won't. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about positioning. This is baby Zoe. She's a very good girl. She was quiet this whole time, didn't ask for anything. So let's talk a little bit about positioning. There really isn't right or wrong, but especially for newborns, you really want to help them get into optimal positioning. Afterwards, they will be hanging off the ceiling while latched onto the breast, and you really don't need to do anything. They will do whatever they want, especially from 6 months onwards. But the tiny ones do really need a little bit of guidance to make sure that our positioning is optimal. So the three kind of my rules are tummy to tummy, which basically means we don't feed baby like this and then turning their head to the side. Can you imagine how uncomfortable it is to be feeding like this? So
Alona,
yep.
sorry, would you mind stopping the sharing? Then it would be even better for people to see
Yes.
the positioning.
Okay. So can you see me better
Yeah.
now? So we want tummy to tummy, which basically means your baby is facing towards you. So not on a breastfeeding pillow like this with their head turned, and not kind of dangling like this. We want tummy to tummy. We're going to talk about positions in a second, but it's tummy to tummy. Even if you're doing football or rugby or whatever it is, then you want baby as close to you as possible. The next one will be, you want to make sure that baby's chin is touching the breast. Okay, so we don't want something like this when baby is away from the breast and their nose is buried somewhere. We want this to happen. Okay. And the last, but definitely not least, and this is something I see a lot. So baby starts crying and mom gets really, really upset. And then we get this thing happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then my back hurts and my butt hurts and I'm uncomfortable and I'm just checking the clock to see when are we going to be done, because I can't do this. And she said an hour, but how am I going to do this for an hour?
And then I'm stressed and I have no oxytocin.
Yes. And the feed is just horrible. So it will be better for baby to fuss for 20 seconds because that's all we need. 20 seconds. But make sure that you're comfortable. So please don't do this on a desk chair like this. But yes, I've seen it. So that's why I'm saying, please don't. You can do this in your bed. You can do this on chair and nursing chair if you want it. But make sure you're comfortable. Get your pillows ready. Get everything ready. And when you're comfortable, you put baby to the breast instead of this. So I'm going to resume sharing and we're going to talk a little bit. Actually, we don't. We can resume sharing later so you can see me better. So in the hospital, they're going to tell you about mostly upright feeding positions. To be very honest, they're not my favorite, but I'm going to show you. And we're also going to talk about better options versus not so great options. But if you're doing an upright position, you want something to support. So a sturdy pillow would be a good idea. So the first people think about is cradle, which is basically this, but try to avoid this and make sure that even if you're using a pillow, it's to support your arm instead of having
the baby lying on it.
baby lying on it. That's a big difference.
Yeah.
Okay. So baby is in the crook of my arm. I'm cradling the baby. That's the reason why it's called like this. And baby is latched on. Now I find that this is quite an awkward position because then you need to do this. So if you want an upright position, I prefer the cross cradle. You have a lot more control there. So what we do is we support baby's neck, so ear to ear, so it's not this because they will push back. And then we can help the breast. So we have a much easier time latching as opposed to kind of doing this. So cradle versus cross cradle, the football or rugby hold is something that a lot of newborns are, or a lot of moms of newborns are taught to do. And I think it only really works when they're very small. Once they get long, they start kicking the back and they're also quite heavy. So it's very hard to hold them like this. But in the beginning, if you have a tiny sleepy baby, this can be a good option for you. And again, we have the other hand that can help. So that's important. Now, side lying, I'm not going to lie down, but basically, I'm not because it might be hard to get up. But basically, you're lying on your bed and you're facing baby. And then the baby is facing you. So again, the biggest key here is not have this happening, but baby is on their side and facing the breast. Now, I have to put a little star on this position because a lot of people really, really want to do this position. And for those that where it works, it's lovely because you get to lie down. But a lot of newborns are not great at this position. So they can lie there and just fall asleep.
Yeah.
Then because mom is lying down, she will fall asleep as well. And then we're not really sure, did we have a feed? Did we not have a feed? What just happened? So maybe wait, you can try, but maybe wait a little bit until baby is a little bit bigger and stronger and more efficient.
I always say that the sideline position is pro level.
Yes, it really is. It really, I think even for me, I only did that with my babies when they were 2-3 months old. I really did not, it very rarely does it work well with tiny newborns.
Yeah.
So the last, but definitely not least, and personally, it's my favorite position, is one with many, many names. And one where you really don't need the pillow for.
Yeah.
So you can find it online under laid back breastfeeding, natural breastfeeding, and biological nurture.
Logical hold, yeah.
All the names you can think about. I like to call it the recline position. I'm a very practical person, and I want to call it a recline because you don't have to lie flat. When you hear the term laid back, you really think you need to lie all the way down. And that can be really tricky with tiny ones because not all of them can be pro level, like you said, and some will need a little bit of help. So if we're more reclined, and again, I'm doing this on this chair, but please don't, because you see, I have no support. So ideally, I want somewhere where I have lower back support. And if I'm being really greedy, I also want some head support also. So we want the baby to go on top. And then we're putting our hand here. And if we need a pillow, it will be a pillow under our elbow. So you're the base and the baby's on you, and we're using gravity to hold. And for most babies, this works so much better. They're more comfortable, mom is more comfortable, and the feeding usually works a lot better.
Can I ask you something here? Because I find that this position, while it is one of my preferred as well, I find that moms who've had a C-section find it very hard to get in and out of that position.
So here's the thing. I actually love this position for C-section moms because although it's not as easy to get into,
Yeah.
while you're in it, there's no pressure on your wound.
Absolutely.
So
Getting in and out of it, any clever ideas?
realistically, a C-section is major surgery. You do want to have, if possible, someone to help you getting in and out or bringing the baby to you. So I completely get that it's not as easy to maneuver, but once the baby's on, most of my C-section moms will go, oh, it doesn't hurt.
Yeah, so much better.
Because the baby's away from the incision, you're not sitting on it, so you're not applying pressure on the wound. And it's just a more comfortable experience for everyone. So yes, maybe in the first week or so, it is easier to have someone to help you put the baby on. But I had a visit with a mom yesterday. Baby is exactly a week old. And she had a C-section, and she actually did really well with bringing baby on. So it's just really a few days of maybe someone helping.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so let me now resume the sharing. Do we have any questions so far?
No, and we also need to speed up a bit because
Yes,
you can
because I talk a lot, I know. My husband also says that. It's a manufacturing bug, I think. Okay, so we're just gonna move past this. We're quickly gonna talk about what is a good latch. So we want a big open mouth. We want the chin touching the breast and not pulling away. We want obviously a breathing baby, so we don't want the nose to be so squished, but the tip can definitely touch. We want cheeks that are full and rounded and not going. And we want to make sure it does not hurt. So this is really my biggest thing. And the reason I'm sharing this slide is because so many moms are told, you need to toughen up. You need to suffer through the first weeks. It's supposed to be painful. And no, it is not. If it hurts, something is off. Please, let's see what's going on. Because if it hurts, it also means the latch isn't quite right. So we need to see how we can make it better. And this is just a summary of what we talked about. We feed at least 8 times in 24 hours. And in the first 4 to 6 weeks, feeds of 45 to 60 minutes are normal. Pain, however, is not normal. Okay? So feeding cues. Now you can memorize early cues and mid cues and late cues, but to be honest, you don't need to. All you really need to know is my baby woke up, I need to feed my baby. They don't wake up to do anything else. So the easiest time to latch a newborn is really when they wake up and they go. Don't wait for them to start crying, because if they're crying and they're upset, it's going to be really hard for them to latch. Then you might need to calm them down and try and latch. So baby woke up, feed the baby. Okay, now we're moving on to my favorite topic ever, pees and poops.
I love that too.
I love it. I love it. And it's funny because all of these are pictures of my clients' babies' poops where I have permission to share. And people laugh. I asked them for poop pictures, but I'm like, no, this is important.
Exactly.
So meconium is the first poop, and we have that in the first 1 to 2 days. It's this black, sticky, tar-like substance. By day 3 or 4, the poop starts turning green. Then it gradually becomes more brownish. And by the end of the first week, we want this mustardy yellow color. It can be watery, it can be seedy, but that's the color ideally we want from 1 week to about 6 months when we start solids. And when we start solids, this is where, God help us, they start smelling really, really bad. Okay, so I want us to play a little game, and hopefully you're all still awake and with us. So we're going to be counting poops, but do we count everything? And this is interesting. When I come for a visit, I always ask how many pees, how many poops, and I get a very huge array of answers. But what I'm actually asking is how many substantial poops are we doing? Not these little sharks.
But
So I'm going to ask this question. So which ones do we count when we count how many poops baby has a day? Any idea?
Two of them, like the second and fourth.
Yes, perfect. So number 1 and number 3 are these tiny shards where we obviously change the diaper, but we don't count them in our app or whatever tracking you're doing. Now, although 2 and 4 are not huge poops, but they're enough to be counted. And I think this is what we were talking about earlier. You don't always know how much your baby is drinking from the breast at a given feed. The best way to know if things are going well is by pees and poops. So if we have enough pees and poops, it's very likely that things are going well. And if we don't, then we need to investigate. But when I ask how many pees and poops, I have sometimes families who count 1 and 3, and I don't want to count 1 and 3.
yeah.
Okay?
I want to add something here because we had a question earlier on a good set of scales that you would recommend, and I would really love your input on that.
So here,
But what I wanted to say too is we shouldn't be getting too hung up on weighing the baby. So if your pediatrician is super concerned and is stressing you to give formula, then yes, maybe you want to borrow some scales to see, how much are they putting on, or how much are they actually taking in one poo. And this is, in one feed. And this is under the guidance of an IBCLC, I would say. But
So
otherwise, the poos are a better indication of the milk transfer, right?
yes. So here's the thing. Well, obviously, this is my job, and I will weigh them before and after, and we have an idea of what's happening. In general, I don't advise my families to have a scale. I find it's very, very stressful.
Yeah.
And this weighing becomes the kind of the goal and the holy grail, and it stresses everyone out. So we talk about making sure pees and poops are doing well. We weigh them on a weekly basis or twice a week to make sure we're going where we need to go. But unless it's a really, really complicated case, I really wouldn't suggest buying a scale similar to mine. Also, it's a $2,000 scale. You
Wow.
don't. Yeah, I know. Ow. It's my best friend. I guard it with my life. But it's also not needed on a feeding basis.
Mhm.
So this is where there are scales, and most scales you can probably get on Amazon or something like this. Just know they're not sensitive enough to do the pre and post feed weight. So what I would do is I weigh them every 3 to 4 days or every week to get the trend and see, are we gaining weight or are we not gaining weight? And also that will be in very specific cases.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we're talking about pees, we're also talking about having a diaper which weighs a good amount, so not these dry diapers. And we want the pee to be either clear or this light straw color. If we have orange peas, if we have crystals, especially after day 3, then let me know so we can see what's going on. Okay. So, is your baby getting enough? You feed at least 8 times in 24 hours. You make sure baby has enough pees and poops each day. How much is enough? By day 4, we need at least 3 to 4 poops. And we need at least 5 to 6 pees by day 5. So this is, if we get them, baby's growing, gaining weight, everything is fine. You can relax, okay? So how does this work? Babies usually lose about 7 to 10% of their birth weight in the first few days. And ideally, we want baby to regain it by 2 weeks.
Can I add something here? We often see that in long drawn inductions, and unfortunately we have a lot of inductions in Singapore, their birth weight can be inflated because they are under the influence of IV fluids.
Yes.
So there are now protocols, I think in the UK, they only weigh after 24 hours,
Yes.
so that has reduced.
This is something I talk about quite a lot with either my C-section families or my induction families. A lot of these initial weigh-ins are very, very inflated, and then suddenly they lose so much weight and so much is happening. So this is also always something I check for.
Right.
Okay. After the first 2 weeks, we should gain at least 150, but to be honest, my comfort level is about 200 grams a week. If we're doing 200 grams a week, we're usually doing quite well. And once we're done with the feed, we have a happy, content, satisfied baby who's milk drunk or in a milk coma. So that baby in that picture there was such a cutie. And he finished the feed. He had over 100 ml at this point, and he was just lying there like he's sunbathing. And it was very, very, very cute to see. Okay.
Oh, one thing I just thought about as well is that thinking about the color of the poos, because we always teach in our classes as well. Breastfeeding Mothers Support Group has a great infographic on it, but this can be a little bit distorted, I find, the color, when we have formula milk and when we have phototherapy.
Yes.
So just so moms are aware that sometimes your poo might look different just because you've had some intervention.
So formula usually is greenish and it has this pasty texture. So not so much liquidy, but more pasty. I've even had one baby who had this fluorescent green poop every time he had formula, which was quite stressful for the family until I pointed it out. But it is different. Phototherapy also changes the consistency a little bit, but that's how a baby who's 100% on breast milk should have poops looking like. So I know we're running out of time. We're just going to cover very basics of pumping because it's a big question. You don't have to pump if baby is latching well, gaining weight, peeing, pooping. You're not going back to work and you don't want to pump. So a lot of people think that pumping is a must. It isn't. If everything is going well, you don't have to. Now, if baby isn't feeding, so let's say baby has phototherapy and is too tired to latch, or there are some issues and we're not really latching well, we're not transferring well, and then we need to introduce some pumping, that is something I work with a lot of families on, and we come up with a plan to incorporate pumping and latching, and if it's temporary or if it's more permanent, as it's something that the parents want to do. So if a mom chooses to exclusively pump, or if baby can't latch and then mom will exclusively pump, then ideally it should be similar to how a baby would latch. So we do that 8 times if possible in 24 hours. And it should be about 20 to 30 minutes each time. Obviously, there are different variations. There are power pumps. There are a lot of things that we're not going to go into because they're case-by-case basis. But if you want to exclusively pump, then it should at least try and mimic how a baby would latch. So I see sometimes moms who pump 3 to 4 times in 24 hours and complain that their supply isn't where it needs to be and ask what kind of food they need to eat. But we do need to understand that there are usually number of pumps that we need to do in order to stimulate the breasts enough to get a full supply. Now, there are different pumps on the market. Some pumps are better than others. Some pumps are usually working for more specific functions and are not designed for the early days, where other pumps are great at stimulating milk production, are more robust. So if you're confused about pumping, let me know. We can work out which pump works better for you.
I have a question on pumps, and then I have a longer question as well from a mom that I do want to have answered. So this question regarding pumps is, how can we pump a little for storage, but without increasing the supply too much? Because there is something like oversupply that can be as much of an issue as undersupply.
Yes, definitely. So that's a great question. And basically, if we want to pump a little bit so we have some milk stored in the fridge or in the freezer, then the best recommendation is to pump irregularly. So we pump, let's say today it will be 10 a.m. and tomorrow it will be 12 and the next day it will be 3 p.m. So we're not getting your body used to pumping on top of breastfeeding each time. So you have a little bit of milk at different times. And if you know you're going to go and have a class in a couple of days, or you have an appointment and you want to make a bottle, then that's a great way to do that without causing an oversupply.
Okay, so irregular.
Yes.
And then is there any particular time of the day you'd recommend to pump? If you want to introduce paced bottle feeding at weeks 5, 6, is any particular time in the day going to yield more output?
So yield more will be morning. Morning usually makes more milk. So early morning is usually the time where most moms make more milk. So that's a time, if you want to pump and you want to see a bigger output, that will probably be in the morning.
Okay.
So I want to talk a little bit about the importance of support. Yes, breastfeeding is natural, but it's also a skill that needs to be learned and mastered. For some moms, it's easy, and I'm super, super happy for them. But most of them, myself included, needed a little bit of help early on to make sure it works and kind of set us off on the right course. I became a lactation consultant because I had great help with my first one. And I want to do the same for the families I work with. So a lot of breastfeeding problems, and this is something you said earlier, can be prevented or solved quickly if we address them early, but they can also snowball really, really fast and become very big problems if we wait. So if you find that something isn't working, it's painful, baby's not gaining weight, we don't have enough pees and poops, ask for help. Usually it doesn't require much to get things happening the way they're supposed to. Okay, so this is about professional help, but there was actually a study that found that the #1 factor that determines a successful breastfeeding journey is the partner support. Because as great as IBCLC are, as great as doulas can be and support the early days, but we go home, and the ones that are there with you are your partners. And if they're supporting you, everything looks a lot better. So I'm always very happy when we have partners joining in, because this is a team effort. The other thing I would say, there will always be people second guessing you. Always, always, always. Everyone will have an opinion. Everyone will have something to say. Everyone will have an advice that no one asked for. So my best piece of advice that no one asked for is to go buy earplugs, smile, and wave. Thank you very much for your lovely advice, and go on with your life. Let them say what they want to say. You're the parent. You know best what is the right thing to do with your baby. And if you're not sure, ask a professional and not someone's auntie. That's usually not the way to go. Now, one of the reasons I love Bumpwise really is because of it's such a great community. And it's very easy for new moms to feel alone. And having a group of moms, or even one that you can complain about your lack of sleep, or just feel like you're not alone in this, can really transform your entire breastfeeding journey or even early motherhood. So thank you, Joanna, for having this amazing, amazing community that so many moms have benefited from.
Yeah.
It really is the best.
Yeah, and I also want to say, you know, we're not shaming. I have met a lot of moms over the years too who couldn't breastfeed, didn't want to breastfeed for a variety of reasons, and that is also okay. And I know that as an IBCLC, we're not supposed to say that, I think, as well.
Listen, more than anything, I'm a human being. You have a right to decide over your body and your baby. And my job is to make sure it works the best way. So I work on weaning, we stop breastfeeding, I work with formula feeding families, we work on proper bottle feeding, we work on making sure that we're safely preparing it. So there's no shaming, there's no judgment. Do the best thing for you and your family, and we're here for you.
Yeah, but I think it's really important that you establish, everybody writes a birth plan, but write a breastfeeding plan. You know, if this is really important to you, make that known to everybody, including your pediatrician, and get a pediatrician who is supportive of this as well and is not going to throw things into the mix that might jeopardize your breastfeeding journey. Okay, Alona, I've got a few questions for you that I hope we answer. If supply is established by 6 weeks old, how can I increase my supply now when baby is 4 months? Is this even possible? She didn't used to drink much as she had an aversion to my fast flow boobs. Fast flow, we didn't talk about that. But now she seems to always want more milk and try to latch more. But my supply is not much anymore, especially on the left side. How can I increase supply effectively? I've tried latching more often and drinking more and eating more galactagogues, but it's not working.
So this is probably one situation. And again, I'm going to put a disclaimer because I don't know the whole history.
Story, yeah.
And I always have a hard time answering specific questions. In general, what I would suggest for a mom who wants to build her supply and has tried all of these things, we will add in probably a few pumping sessions throughout the day. So we have another external stimuli for the breasts and we're making more milk. Yes, it is more challenging increasing supply at 4 months, but it's not impossible.
Okay. Good. That's good to hear. So one reason to contact you. Another question is, I've noticed my baby, almost 4 weeks old, being really fussy around the nipple, around witching hour, or even at night after latching for 5 minutes. She clearly has it on her mouth, so there is milk, and usually doesn't have any issue in latching. How can I help with a better position or calm her down?
So this, again, disclaimer, I haven't seen them. So any specific questions you're asking, this is not 100% because I haven't seen you and seen the situation. But in general, a lot of babies around that age struggle with gas and they're very uncomfortable with gas. So burping them very frequently, doing tummy time, holding them upright, giving them burp breaks really, really helps because the gas can be overwhelming for a baby and it peaks around 4 to 6 weeks. So it sounds on par with what that mom is describing.
Interesting. Then I also find that, but this is not necessary in this situation because it happens at a specific time. Often I find that babies pulling away from the breast, this could be the fast letdown or the fast flow that the other mom was mentioning as well.
It really depends
good.
when the baby pulls away. So if they pull away initially, that's likely because it's a fast letdown. If baby starts pulling away towards the end, it actually might mean it's slowed down and they're getting frustrated. So it really depends at what point are we talking about.
Okay, amazing. And then we just had some moms say, loving your advice, and some moms in our chat group saying, oh, Alona is amazing. So here you have it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Alona, can we stop the sharing for a moment?
Yes, definitely.
And yeah, I
Perfect.
just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for the moms who joined our call, and thank you for those of you parents who are watching this at a later stage. I'll post the video, the link to the YouTube video in a little while. And thank you, Alona, for spending your morning with us. It's always
Thank you
great.
so much
to
for
learn.
having me.
Amazing. Thank you so much,
It's-
and we'll see you all very soon. Have a
Bye-bye. Thank you.
bye-bye.